So would you believe that intermittent fasting could in fact improve your eye health? I have several friends who do fasting on a regular basis, and they've mentioned to me that their vision or eyesight improves while they are on a fast. And I've always been curious about this. So in today's video, we're going to be reviewing what the research shows about intermittent fasting on our eye health and our vision. And as more research emerges, it becomes quite clear that not only what we eat, but when we eat it can affect not only our overall health, but our eye health as well. This video is in fact going to be the start of a mini-series I'm creating all about diet and the eyes. So whether you're interested about specific foods that can benefit the eyes or specific diets like the carnivore diet, the Mediterranean diet, or you want to know more about the gut microbiome, we'll have videos all on those subjects, and I'll put them in a full playlist, and I'll put a link to that at the top of the video description so you can check out everything. So first, what is intermittent fasting, and how does it work? Intermittent fasting is where you alternate periods of either eating food and caloric restriction or fasting. There's many different ways to do this. In fact, there could be a way of maybe eating during an 8-hour period of the day and then fasting during the remainder, or perhaps you can choose to eat only one meal a day or eating one meal every few days. Again, there's several different ways to do this and several different research studies looking into trying to optimize is one more effective versus the other. That's a little bit beyond this video, but at the very core, the idea is that you are forcing your body to use the energy from the last meal you ate and then kind of optimize how your body functions by burning other fuels during the rest of the day, mainly from the source of fat cells. Intermittent fasting is known as a way to boost metabolism, also to reduce inflammation and oxidative stress, as well as activating a cellular process called autophagy, which is essentially a cellular process that works by recycling and helping clean out damaged cells. Fasting has also been shown to help with insulin sensitivity, which may play a huge role with eye health, as well as having an influence on our nervous system, including our sympathetic and parasympathetic tone, which may directly affect the choroid, which is a meshwork of blood vessels in the back of the eye that can directly influence ocular blood flow. Now, digging into the research, there's actually several specific eye diseases that have been studied using intermittent fasting. First of which is that of diabetes or diabetic retinopathy, which is a huge deal in the world of eye care because blindness and vision loss from diabetic retinopathy is like one of the leading causes of vision loss for working age adults. Diabetes plays a huge role in the eye because when you have elevated levels of blood sugar, it can cause damage to the blood vessels in the back of the eye, which can lead to not only leakage of blood and fluids into the eye, but also inflammation, as well as calling in new irregular blood vessels to grow within the eye. And intermittent fasting may be able to help with this because intermittent fasting has not only been shown to help reduce blood glucose levels, but also improve lipid metabolism and with weight loss management for some people, all of which can help prevent potential damage to the delicate retinal blood vessels. And research has also shown that intermittent fasting can help activate protective proteins within the eye and the liver, such as something called sirtuin 1, which is a protein that is often downregulated in people who are diabetic, but when intermittent fasting, the expression of this SIRT1 protein is elevated, and that helps reduce inflammation and helps prevent mitochondrial damage. This exact mechanism has been only studied in mice so far that I could find, but I think just understanding that mechanism could explain how intermittent fasting could be beneficial for diabetics and specifically diabetic retinopathy. Next, let's talk about intermittent fasting and dry eye syndrome, as this is a topic I not only specialize a little bit more in, but I'm also just quite fascinated with the fact that we're finding through the research that dry eye can be strongly influenced by things like our diet and lifestyle factors. In the case of dry eye, intermittent fasting could theoretically help by reducing inflammation, because inflammation plays a huge role in the nature of dry eye disease, where when you have dryness on the eye, a little bit of damage occurs on the surface, and that releases inflammatory proteins to try and heal it. But when this occurs chronically over time, the inflammatory proteins never stop going away. Instead, they further dysregulate the tear film in the ocular surface, causing more inflammatory proteins to come out, and ends up becoming this vicious spiraling cycle where dry eye just gets worse and worse. And again, theoretically, intermittent fasting may be able to reduce inflammation and help reduce that inflammatory cascade. However, intermittent fasting may also make dry eye worse, mainly through dehydration. Because if you're dehydrated, then you may not be producing enough tears, and the osmolarity or salt content of the tears would go up, and that can help trigger that inflammatory cascade in the first place. So it sort of seems like a dual-edged sword here. Another possible benefit of intermittent fasting and dry eye actually goes back to improved glucose metabolism and how glucose metabolism can help improve the health of the corneal nerve endings on the surface of the eye, which plays a major role in not only detecting the amount of tears on the surface of the eye, but also the damage that occurs to the eye from dryness. In fact, this is the same reason why people who are diabetic and have poor glucose control tend to have worse dry eye disease, because the corneal nerves are just not as healthy and they don't detect and respond the same way to dryness as they would for somebody who has better glucose control. So again, there could be some additional benefits to intermittent fasting for dry eye in that capacity. But I think either way, from looking at this research, we can tell that if you are going to be doing any intermittent fasting, be sure to be paying close attention to your hydration levels and staying well hydrated. There are in fact many publications on the effects of fasting in dry eye, and I think the Dues 2 Lifestyle Report from 2023 did probably the best job outlining these sort of studies and found them largely sort of mixed. I'm not too surprised by that though, because we know how complicated dry eye is and all the many factors that kind of get rolled into that. So again, for them finding kind of mixed results, I'm not too surprised. But still, the interest in the idea of how intermittent fasting may help with dry eyes is there and is currently still under investigation. All right, now let's move on to intermittent fasting and its effects on glaucoma. Glaucoma is a group of eye conditions where the optic nerve slowly dies over time. And although it's not required for the development of glaucoma, it is often associated with elevated pressure inside of the eye. Interestingly, studies on intermittent fasting have been kind of inconclusive about how intermittent fasting affects the internal pressure of the eye, but they have found in animal studies that when fasting, this seems to have a protective role on the retinal ganglion cells within the nerve. And this kind of has a protective effect against stressors on the eye, such as elevated eye pressure. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any human clinical trials on the effect of intermittent fasting and glaucoma, but based on the animal studies that are out there, there is a hypothesis that intermittent fasting could have this protective effect on the nerve in cases of glaucoma. And then the final specific area where intermittent fasting is being studied with the eyes is in the area of the gut microbiome, because essentially everything we eat and consume can alter or change the microorganisms that line our GI tract. And there is a clear and fascinating connection between our gut and our eyes, which is just kind of weird, right? In fact, there are many studies that link changes to the gut microbiome to developments of eye diseases such as diabetic retinopathy, age-related macular degeneration, and that of uveitis, which is a form of extreme inflammation in the eye that is often associated with autoimmune disorders. And intermittent fasting has been shown in research to influence the gut microbiome by either encouraging some microbes to thrive while others maybe are forced to die off. And this, in turn, could potentially influence certain eye diseases, mainly by throttling what type of inflammatory signals are being sent from the gut to the eye. Now, definitely make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the little notification bell so that you get notified when our next video going way deeper dive into the gut microbiome and the eye comes out. I think it's just, again, a fascinating area of research and very new, but again, we're learning so much about how our diet can affect our gut and how our gut can affect so many other organs of the body. Otherwise, on a long-term scale, if somebody does intermittent fasting for several months and maybe loses weight because of the intermittent fasting, we also know that as people with diabetes, if they have elevated blood sugar, that can cause the lens inside their eye to swell. And so if you have better blood glucose control and you've lost weight, perhaps the swelling of the lens inside the eye will come down. And because of that, someone's refractive error or their myopia or hyperopia may shift. And so that could also be a reason on a long-term scale some people with intermittent fasting may notice an improvement in their vision. Now, of course, I am only an eye doctor. I am not an absolute expert in the world of intermittent fasting, but from reading the research and digging into it, it seems like there may be a role for intermittent fasting and its reflection in eye care. And I'd love to know your thoughts. If you've ever tried intermittent fasting, what your experience has been, what kind of positives or negative effects, maybe struggles you've had with intermittent fasting, and if there's any additional resources that you would have for other people who are maybe interested in starting intermittent fasting or giving it a try. Either way though, and as always, if you're considering making any dietary changes, definitely encourage you to talk with your local healthcare professional, especially if you have any underlying health conditions. But let me end today's video just by saying thank you very much for being here, and if you want to learn more about any other cool different types of food for the eye or other different types of diets and how they affect the eye, check out our next video coming over here to the side. Keep an eye on it, and we'll see you in that next video.